you very much for that interview.
Thank you so much.
Community and Wellbeing Officer. The Community and Wellbeing Officer represents students on issues affecting their well-being, such as health, finance, accommodation and security, as well as wider community issues. The Community and Wellbeing Officer is key to ensuring that students from a range of backgrounds and minority groups are represented within the university. They also ensure that students are represented fairly within the local community, liaising with both town and parish council officials.
Hello, I'm Jess Rolfe and I'm joined by Hannah Nimmo, who is running for the Community and Wellbeing Opposition. Welcome to UOI.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, as the current Community and Wellbeing Officer, what do you think students should vote for you for a second year instead of someone new?
I think the main thing that sets me apart from everyone else is the experience I've got. Obviously, I'm a current Community and Wellbeing Officer, so I've got a really good idea of the systems that are in place at the university and at USU. I know how to actually go about making change, which I think is something that can be quite a difficult thing to actually learn. Like, you have to go through a lot of processes, and I think I've got the right contacts and the right abilities to be able to sort of fast track some of those a little bit, get through things a bit faster. I also just think like I'm very passionate about this. Like, community and wellbeing's been everything I've done at uni. Like, this job is my life. Like, I've said it's been my pride and joy being in this role. So I just love the opportunity to do it again for a bit longer.
Awesome. So we'll jump into your manifesto.
Yeah.
In there, you say you'll push for better affordability of housing and more streamlined process for accommodation.
Yeah.
Could you explain what that would look like and how it would help students?
Okay, yeah. So one of the main issues we've noticed with housing over the last couple of years, and every academic year for some reason it seems to get worse, is that student housing is being released earlier and earlier. So when I was in my first year back in 2019 going into 2020, student houses were released in January. We're now about 3 years down the line, and they're now being released as early as October for the following academic year. And that's just not acceptable. Students should not be signing for houses 8 months before they move into them. And then similarly to that, obviously the university's accommodation the applications for those don't align very well with the private housing market. So I would like to see them properly streamlined, which would ideally be that the private houses move back to about that January, February, maybe even into March time. Because there's some like renters reform bills and things like that are going through government, which means in a few years' time, you won't be able to apply for a house up to about 2 months before you move into it. And so if that's going to be the case, then it's likely that students will, that's not going to apply to student housing, but it's likely that those dates will still move back anyway. So it'd just be nice to get a bit of a head start on that to sort of ease that transition for students.
Okay, so you did mention streamlining the release of continuing accommodation in your manifesto last year.
Yeah.
Is that something you weren't able to fully realise, or is that something you need more time to work on?
I think it's mainly a time thing. I think with accommodation, whether that's private housing or university accommodation, it's a very long process that's planned out way in advance. So this was something that was on my manifesto last year, and the reason why I've not achieved it yet is because I kind of came into the role too late to do anything about it. Because all the applications and things were all sort of ready to go. So it would be the sort of thing that if I was re-elected, I'm going to be working on it into summer term anyway, but it means that if I'm elected for a second year, I'll be able to properly see that through, because it's a really high priority for me. I just need a little bit more time to do it.
Okay. So we'll move on to something else. You've said you want to lobby the university to increase support for household energy bills and rental students. Obviously, there's already an energy bill grant. What extra level of support do you think you can viably achieve, and how will you go about getting that for students?
Yeah, I think the household energy grant's been a really good introduction, because it's obviously those students who are affected by the energy bills that have gone up. That's going to cause obviously a lot of issues for students having to pay their rent. So it's a little subsidy that means that they aren't as badly affected by those costs. The main issue is that most of the housing in York is bills included, and therefore those students who are bills included aren't eligible for the household energy grant, but they're still experiencing issues with rent prices going up. So therefore, what more can we do to sort of help them with their rents? Can we introduce a rent bursary? Can we introduce sort of a bit more of like a holistic fund where obviously the household energy grant's a very specific cohort of students? Can we provide more support that more students can access and can access more easily as well? That's my main priority.
Okay. So as part of your response to the cost of living crisis in the past year, you used to have introduced 40p breakfast going into another year in the role where students are likely to be struggling financially. How else do you intend to help students cope with the cost of living? Yeah,
I think sort of one of the main issues that we've seen is obviously rent, which we've touched on. I think we're doing some really good jobs with the 40p food offerings, and we're looking to hopefully introduce a third offering by the end of the academic year. So fingers crossed that will mean that you can get 3 meals for about 40p, around that price mark across campus, so for the 3 meals of the day. and I'd love to see those continued. But I think for me, it's the main thing of that students are sort of still struggling with costs of transport, especially going to things like placements and commuting students as well. That's a massive thing. I've been doing a bit of work with commuting students already this year, and one of their main issues that they're facing is that they can't afford to travel to and from campus anymore because it's just too expensive. So I'd really like to see the university introduce some more financial support for those students as well, because why should the cost of transport be a barrier coming to campus? Because everyone should be able to access it regardless of where they live.
Would that be in the form of grants from the university or working with like First Bus or something to reduce the prices of transport?
I think it would be a little bit of both. I think I'd like to see a bit more support from First Bus with commuting students and sort of like travel passes and things like that. But I think in terms of subsidising those costs, it would likely have to come from the university, because I think obviously they're students at the university, and I think First Bus, if they're introducing subsidies, it's usually the university who pays for them. So I think it would have to be a bit of a collaborative effort between UC, the university, and First Bus.
Okay. Another main point in your manifesto is to lobby the university to introduce more signage for wheelchair-friendly, cycle-friendly and accessible walking paths around campus. Yeah. Why do you feel this is such an important issue to focus on this year?
I think ultimately we're returning back from COVID, like students are now back on campus probably almost entirely. And I think because of that, it then has highlighted some problems that sort of existed on campus and have been neglected through the pandemic. I get emails from students most days saying I'm trying to get around on a wheelchair and the pavements are uneven, or I tried to walk somewhere and I encountered some steps and had to turn around and was late to my lecture. And obviously if there's signage to say like this path isn't wheelchair friendly, or this path has some stairs on it, or there's a lot of confusion at the moment with where actual bicycles can go on campus and what's a pedestrian path and what's a cycle path. So I think it's just, if it's a bit more clearly outlined, I think it will just mean that transition around campus will be a lot easier.
Okay. So obviously you're rerunning for this role.
Yeah.
Is there anything you feel that you went into the role last year wanting to achieve that you haven't been able to? And would these things be something you need an extra year to work on? And then on that, if that's the case, why should students trust that you can deliver this time around? Yeah,
I think obviously I've kind of touched on it. The main one is the housing issue. I think there's I was very ambitious with my manifesto last year. It was quite big and it was quite extensive. And I think I just simply don't have enough time to achieve everything on that manifesto. And that's just me being completely brutally honest.
Is that something you've learned in a year in the role, that you have to be a bit less ambitious with it?
Well, there's no harm in being ambitious necessarily. It's just don't try and spread yourself out too thin. So people have said that my manifesto this year is a lot smaller and a lot more refined, and that's because it's something I know I can actually deliver on. And the things that I've not delivered on, namely sort of streamlining housing accommodation, and sort of a bit more representation within USU. So obviously that was something that was on my manifesto last year, which I've kind of achieved, or I've started to achieve, but I need a bit more time to be able to do that. So they're definitely things I will be wanting to continue in a second year in the role. And the reason why I can actually deliver on that is because if you look at my track record this year, I've delivered on a lot of my manifesto already. And it's just simply that the things I haven't delivered on, I need a bit more time to deliver on. But then there's also some other things I would like to do in a second year as well. So I think I've got the best of both in terms of the ambition for a second year, but also the experience from a first year that will help me direct a second one.
Do you think that your experience is something students should consider when voting for you or deciding if they should vote for you?
Yeah, I would like to think so. There's always that argument, I suppose, of having a fresh face in the role, but I think ultimately with a remit that's extensive as community and wellbeing is, you need someone who knows that inside out, and it takes a long time to learn sort of the processes and all the different people that you're dealing with and sort of make those relationships both internally and externally to the university. And I have all of those in place now, so I think a lot of the things I want to change will become a lot easier to change because I've already got the foundation to be able to build on.
Okay, so we've got about a minute and a half left.
Yeah.
If you were to sum up your whole manifesto in a plea to students to vote for you, what's the main thing that you want them to take away from that?
Yeah, so my key aim for the year, I guess, is to continue to build a union that students truly feel represented by, and that's all students feel represented by. Because I think UC's doing an increasingly good job of representing students, but we still get feedback that some students don't feel represented by the union and don't feel part of the university community that we have here in York, and that is really disheartening to me. And as Community and Wellbeing Officer, that's something I want to change, because I think all students should feel part of the university and they should feel a sense of belonging and a sense of pride to go to this university. And if they don't do that, then I think that's something we really should change.
How would you make all students feel represented?
I think it's increasing that representation, so working with our part-time officers, and also consultation with students is a big one for me. We don't know, students are the main body of our institution, and UC don't know what students think unless they ask them, and that same goes for the university. So if you want to know what students think, you should just ask them, and if the university won't ask them, then I will.
Well, thank you for speaking
thank you
to
for
me.
having
We've
me.
got about 10 seconds left. I think after this, I think we're going back to green room. That might be wrong. But anyway, thank you for speaking to me.
Thank you very much for having me.
And back over to green room very, very shortly.